What's good? Peace world. Thanks for pressing play on another Bite Down Boxing live stream. Had some technical difficulties getting in here as soon as I tried to get fancy and schedule the show. Of course, all of the little technical stuff, what stream I'm coming from, and some other behind the scenes stuff, of course it went awry, but nonetheless, we're here rocking. Gonna talk about some rematch stuff right now, or in a couple of minutes. Not much housekeeping things to address, but obviously, 2019, late 2019 is shaping up. We have a bunch of interesting rematches out there. One being the Jared Hurd and Julian J-Rock Williams rematch, another being the big one with Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz Jr. We'll see how that one goes. Who else is out there? And then Charlo and Tony Harrison. So Jermell Charlo, that is, for the WBC Super Welterweight title. So it might be another one or two out there. I'll get to them as they come to me. I guess if I had to put one major thought out here for this piece, it would be, why is it a lag on this thing? But anyway, it would be, why does Anthony Joshua not get any consideration? He's not given any chance by most, and the thought is that he should take a year off or a year and a half, 9 months to 18 months before he should, try to challenge Andy Ruiz again, Andy Ruiz Jr. But how could you have that thought? How could anybody have that thought and then be totally mute on the chances of Swift Jared Hurd against Julian Williams? I don't see how that adds up. But of course, it's almost like we want to see Anthony Joshua completely pushed off the international stage, completely removed from the public's eye. And on the other side, and then I'm sorry, that was the other one, the other big one. I left something out there. The other big one was Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. That rematch. But there's a lot of clamor for that fight because a lot of us want to see Deontay Wilder expand, blow up, get bigger. That's where I was going with that. But we want to see him take over. If you're not already in the crowd that thinks that Deontay Wilder is the face of boxing, I'll leave that up to you. You know, if you want to run with that, or if you think that's a fact, I take your word for it. I don't know if I wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that because I know, to each his own, to each his reach. But I think it's a couple of different dudes out there. I mean, Canelo being one, the franchise quarterback, the newly elevated franchise quarterback, he's out there. But I don't know. I think it's so much boxing right now. I mean, I guess we could refer to the ESPN or that Forbes 100 of international athletes and the 5 guys, the 5 boxers that are on there. I guess we could refer to any of them as possibly being the face of boxing. But Canelo is a name that they want to throw out there. I'd have problems with that, especially right now with looking into the not being able to name an opponent, for his next fight, and potentially finagling his way into something, whether it be Kovalev, whether it be Andre, whether it be it won't be Charlo. I doubt that. Jamal Charlo. Is it the Triple G rematch? I just don't know. Callum Smith is another option that's kind of moved to the background. I don't know. But yeah, how can we, why is there no chance being given to Anthony Joshua in his situation, needing to get back with Andy Ruiz Jr., but Tyson Fury stands no chance in the rematch? And then we don't even care about Mr. Swift Jared Hurd in his rematch. And I understand that the heavyweights, for some people, the way that the heavyweight division goes is that's all that some people care about. I think it's out there. Looks like this is jumping around quite a bit. I don't know if that's because a bunch of people are off today and the internet is all bogged down with whatever's going on, but I see it's a little delay here. Who knows what's going on in real time? And now I see, say it's still going. But anyway, so what I got to earlier in this week was the last couple of days, the last 48 hours. Looking into this Jared Hurd, Julian Williams rivalry, it's kind of gotten a little more interesting in the last 48 hours and whatnot. I don't know if you saw that PBC piece out there. I don't know if you read or don't read. It's really not my concern. You should try. But it's a lot of people trying to put information out there for you on this sport. You should give them some of your time from time to time. But I thought it was a pretty dope piece out there on what the hell is going on? I thought there was a pretty interesting piece out there to the story. The rivalry that's building between the rivalry that's building between Hurd and Julian Williams. Now that Williams is a unified champion, now it looks like I'm real time again. That looks a little better. All right, now I'm not as concerned. But where was I going with that? Oh, so check out the PBC piece by Lim Satterfield. And now that Swift Jared Hurd has had some time to vacation, come back, sort out some things internally, and sort out some things in the team. In the piece that was up there that I spoke about on a previous video, he won't be moving forward with his longtime trainer Ernesto Rodriguez. And then I also mentioned the fact that I did attend that fight, and in another video I mentioned that I guess I could have handled it a little bit better. I really could have handled it like it was some major news that I was breaking, but I kind of was a bit unsure of where to go with it, because I don't always have access to some of the individuals or to a camp to get the full story and whatnot. So I kind of rolled it out there. In my defense, I would say responsibly, but there was an issue on fight night where I saw some cracks. I saw some, and I looked at it initially as potentially being disloyalty in the public, and was like, as I mentioned in the other video, that Ernesto Rodriguez came out to a couple of us quote-unquote YouTubers and essentially, in so many words, threw Jared Hurd under the bus and spoke to the fact that there were a lot of whispers and there were a lot of things going on in camp. And he said, he alluded to the fact that at a certain point, when he went to instruct Hurd on how to do different things or what he wanted him to do, Hurd had his own ideas of what he was going to do, how he was going to do it. And basically, Nesto his motion was, hey, I had to step back and let him do what he wants to do, how he wants to do it. It's his show. And so, like I said, I was trying to see, like, damn, why aren't you in the locker room addressing this with the team? What the hell is going on here? And from that moment on, I was like, well, how can this team move forward with this seemingly at the low point for the team? It's a lot of it's some disarray and people looking for the door. Like, why aren't you in the back right now with your man? And why aren't y'all going over whatever? I mean, not that there's a game too, in 2 nights or 3 nights with the travel day mixed in there. Not that that's the situation, but it just wasn't a good look. But anyway, fast forward to now. What's this? July 3rd, I believe. The article comes out, and Hurd sheds light on the whole situation of what happens once he returned from his vacation, and they had a heart-to-heart, and at the end of all of that, Nesto is not going to be moving forward as his chief second, as his trainer. And so, like I said, going into this rematch now, and he has exercised the clause for that. Stephen Breadman Edwards has acknowledged that and said that they're in preps, or they're in early preparations for that. I think that article might have been on Boxing Scene, where he was just discussing how he would approach it, and or how he would approach that rematch. And we'll get to all of that. But right here, should I say over here, Hurd came out, who's a man, if you've been watching it for the last 18 months, he's a guy that seems to be pretty fond of his hair and his hairstyle and his look and his image and whatnot. And he put out, I should have got a picture of that, but he had a picture of all of his blonde or rust-colored, copper, whatever you would call it, but the frohawk. He had a pile of that where it's been sheared off and it was on the floor. And now I don't know if you were paying attention, but this is one of the things that Stephen Edwards came back when he went over to the locker room on fight night to observe Swift's hands being wrapped. he came back over to Julian Williams afterwards and said, man, you won't believe this, but I don't know if it was Jared Hurd, but he said brothers were over there getting haircuts in the locker room. Real quickly, for those of us that got to give our predictions on this stuff, those of us that are betting on this stuff, how does it, how do you take all of this? You didn't put down $100, a band, $500. You bet multiple people. Looking at the favorite here, which was Jared Hurd going into this thing, and now the man was getting possibly getting a haircut in the back, moments before going out here to fight the most important fight of his career. Then I see him in the ring with this cape on, and the hell is going on? But you didn't put money on this. And if you were at the weigh-in, you saw that it was a dozen dudes walking around with the same Swift Nation or Team Swift sneakers, the same Redskin color, team colored sweatsuits. I mean, they were doing it big. And then on the other side, at the weigh-in, is just Julian Williams, Breadman Edwards, the Cut Man, and then I think super bantamweight Stephen Fulton. They were on that card as well. They had some people with them, and so it may have been some other Philadelphia people in the room, but pretty much it was just a Spartan-like thing for Julian Williams, who was aware that this was his second time around the block. It might not be a third. This kid is looking vulnerable. If you saw the weigh-in, you could see that Jared Hurd, I think, even reached out and put his arm around Julian Williams or gave him a pound or something and just was like, this is a game. And Julian Williams played this thing with a real poker face, knowing that I'm coming in here to kill you and to, pillage, harm, and get up and embarrass you in front of your hometown crowd. And I'm going to get up out of here as a unified champion, as a unified super welterweight champion. And, the following night, that's what transpired. The man was down for the first time in his career in the second round, I believe, maybe third round. But then just a dominant fight to everybody with the exception of Dan Rayfield, who somehow found a way to give the fight to a guy from his home state. Well, I think Rayfield might be from Virginia, and Hurd is from Accokeek, Maryland. But he was in there as the hometown guy, and that's who Dan Rayfield found that for. But anyway, fast forward. We got the image, we got the Instagram post out there. It's on Twitter with Jared Hurd. Something to the effect of, it's chapter 2. I'm moving on. Gotta go get my belts back. Gotta regroup and go back here and be serious. And I gotta put my team back together is one key thing. And then Julian J. Rock Williams comes out and says, with this tweet right here in response, it says, I don't need a new haircut to be savage. I was born savage. Emoji. I'm here for all the action. Just send the contract and enroll in Vata Testing. I kind of didn't. I guess that's a reminder, but according to the piece that I read with Stephen Edwards, there was never any issue with Team Hurd agreeing to do testing, and including that in the terms of the contract and the fight that was eventually made. So I don't think that like I said, I guess that's just reiterating the fact that Edwards and Julian Williams are now on this clean boxing campaign, even though he doesn't hold the WBC title, which has its own formal clean boxing program. But I guess this is just going to be moving forward. This might be part of their message. One other interesting thing that's out here is I'm tripping right now. One other interesting thing that's out there, I didn't really got away from what my point was. Where was I going with that? Anyway. So yeah, like I said, man, I just this is a pivotal moment in the career for Hurd. You're going against a guy who just convincingly beat you at home. Probably won 8 rounds easy, maybe won 9 rounds. And you got to take the time to, in 6 months, because of the immediate rematch, in 6 months, you have to name a new coach or a new trainer, work out the logistics of those guys working together. Does he go across the border and get with Barry Hunter, who's nearby? I suggested Bomac is the trainer of Bud Crawford. I don't know if that's a great fit, but it's a change of scenery and a much different approach to training camp, which it sounds like some issues might have cropped up in training camp for this fight. So I just said Bomac. But again, it's almost like the guy that he would need or should strongly consider is the guy that'll be across the corner in on fight night, in Stephen Edwards, who incidentally is experienced in this type of reclamation project in terms of when they suffered the loss to Jamal Charlo a couple of years ago and they had to rebuild. And if you recall, that was like a 3-step process over 18 months, coming back against what's his name, Joshua Conley, up in Toledo, Ohio, on the Robert Easter Jr. card, fighting on Bounce TV, then moving to Ishe Smith, going the distance with him, in a competitive fight, a challenging fight. And then the IBF Eliminator, I believe, was the next fight with Nathaniel Gallimore, which I've said it a million times, but it just keeps falling on deaf ears, I guess. But kind of was a coming out party for the guy that he was back. And then there was I believe it was a Latino fighter that he fought just like in a stay busy situation, and maybe to maintain a little bit of momentum. I think that one it didn't go the distance, I don't think. I can't even remember the dude's name or what fight card that was on. It kind of just flew by under the radar. But then he gets the big call. The Gallimore fight was actually for the IBF Eliminator. It was an IBF Eliminator to become the Mando for this fight with Jared Hurd. But does his thing on that, and then comes in here on fight night and does his thing. But now, like I said, taking a look at this rematch, what does Jared Hurd do in this thing? I don't know what I wanted to do. Where was it real quick? There we go. Yeah, so what does he do? You've exercised this clause. You only have like 6 months to get ready for this thing. I don't know if once you've exercised that, can you back out and say, change of plans, different things going on in the camp, we'll come back to this. And it's kind of in contrast, when you look across and compare this to the AJ situation or even the Wilder situation with Fury. Of course, there's much bigger business going on with the Anthony Joshua situation, The 3 belts that he was holding, 4 if you throw in that IBO belt. But then you throw in the situation with him trying to get established in the U.S. market. You throw in the factor of DAZN and their chief objective to add subscribers. And it's looking like all of that's going to dictate that the rematch happen immediately. And then secondly, the rematch could possibly, or in my opinion, is likely to take place at Madison Square Garden. And I believe earlier in the week or in the last week, Eddie Hearn was still throwing out there that it was either that the Principality Stadium or whatever in Cardiff, that was one of 2 options, with the other being Madison Square Gardens or Madison Square Garden. And what I was just saying, it seems like Jarrett Hurd has options here. I mean, they still have to nail down where they're going to hold a rematch. I doubt it's in his hometown, area or in the DMV. I'm sure he probably does it. That's not even an arguing point for him. And going over to Philadelphia, if that's where they put it at, and and Julian hosts a hometown fight, that's probably of little consequence to Jarrett Hurd. I mean, he fought for 6 or 7 years. That was his first time fighting back in the DMV, I believe, in 6 or 7 years. While he was becoming a unified champion, he was fighting all over the place. Vegas and Barclays Center and whatnot. I think he was even down, and he might have beat Harrison for the vacant IBF title down in Alabama, I want to say. So, him going on the road an hour and a half, 2 hours away or whatever it is to Philadelphia, that, like I said, that shouldn't be of any consequence in the rematch. But again, looking back, like I said, though, how do you get this together, man? You got a guy who clearly believes he has your number. He's confident in himself and his abilities, and everything that played out in the first fight is basically how Breadman, Edwards, and J-Rock saw it playing out. Like I mentioned before, here it is, Team Hurd, and maybe the PBC. They're looking at, we're holding this matchmaking. I mean, we're holding this homecoming fight for this man for Hurd, and it's a showcase of sorts. And I mentioned this before that for whatever conference you watch, I mentioned the Big Ten being here in the Midwest and being in Big Ten country. Julian Williams was not Purdue or Indiana or Northwestern in some years, Rutgers, Maryland in some years. This wasn't bringing one of those schools, Minnesota. This wasn't bringing one of Nebraska, which, maybe not the name, but their play in the last 5 to 7 years. This wasn't bringing a homecoming opponent in that didn't require all of your attention. So now, I guess if I had to say, and I've been looking around for Ricky Hatton, from across the pond, did his thing over in Great Britain. He comes out this week, I believe, and said that he sees Anthony Joshua beating Andy Ruiz 9 out of 10 times, I think was what he said. I don't know if I say 9. I'd probably say definitely 6 out of 10, and maybe even 7 out of 10. And I'm looking out here for some of my different peers to to get their takes on it and to see what their breakdown of the rematch looks like. And I really don't see too many that are saying anything in favor of Anthony Joshua for various reasons. But again, I really don't see how I think is good business to take this rematch right away. One, I guess two things. One, you're getting paid. You know, you probably gonna make 20 to 30 million based on the deal that's out there with DAZN. Secondly, if you were to lose, but to lose, in a more competitive fight, go the distance, maybe lose a decision, and if you did lose, and even if you get stopped, I would say, maybe you don't get a big deal, an extension with DAZN. I think that deal is near its end. Maybe you don't get that extension and whatever, but he can still go back to England and try to rebuild himself, in my opinion. Even with a knockout loss, he could still go over there, maybe not be in 70 and 80,000, capacity venues, but there's still a path forward if he would even want to consider fighting at that point. Because at that point, I'm assuming you've made over $50 million total based on that Forbes report where I think he made what? He made 50, what they say he had, 50 last year. So with another year, he's reaching 60 plus $65 million in total earnings. If at that point, if you did suffer another loss and you wanted to say, well, this ain't for me, I don't need it, I got other stuff to do. If that is his makeup, I'm not so certain that he doesn't want to compete at some level. So I don't know if he would even go that route. But if he wanted to go back and rebuild, I think there's still a possibility. Now, you lost all the leverage, all that A-side talk, all the stuff that was important to him and negotiating power, all of that stuff that he was wielding, a couple of months ago, all of that stuff is gone, pretty much. But like I said, there's still a way back if he wanted to continue on. The other issue, in my opinion, there, if you do take a more circuitous route and stretch this thing out and try to do a total rebuild, a total rebrand, you go back home and fight, some former guy or just some random top 50 guy in the world or something, and you go out there and have a bad night in front of him, then you don't have anywhere to go. So in my opinion, if we take emotion out of it, if we take our bias out of it, the fact that you never liked the guy, the fact that you thought he was a fraud from the beginning, and if you all of a sudden, over the course of 7 rounds became a super Andy Ruiz stan, then maybe you're sitting here talking about the guy should quit or whatever. But I think if we look at it with some type of reasoning, some type of logic, some type of understanding of the sport of boxing, you go back and you have that fight. Now, I don't know if I agree that you go back to Madison Square Garden. I mean, looking at the event that night, bro didn't have a good night there. He didn't have a good night there at all. We still don't know some of this stuff with the numbers because DAZN doesn't have to announce, it doesn't release its viewership or its audience sizes for the fights that it doesn't want to. Ticket sales and all of that stuff were fairly decent, I think. You could say it was some funny business going on there if you want. It definitely wasn't the situation that we saw with Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. I'm bugging. Tyson Fury and Tom Schwartz. It definitely isn't that type of situation where I think it was 5,000 tickets and then another 2,100 or something or another 1,000 or whatever comped or whatever it was. The fight was held on ESPN Plus. It definitely didn't have that type of performance. But again, I would just think that maybe you fighting him. I don't know. Maybe you come over here. The one thing that's surrounding that situation now is, David Haye comes out and says that he didn't have the right type of sparring saw something. Maybe that was the same story, but he had only technical sparring. During the telecast, they mentioned that he brought in U.S. amateurs, which made no sense. We all know about Joey the Tank DeWelko in that situation, which allegedly there was a knockout, or the belief is that there was a knockout while sparring. So how could he then turn around and say that he didn't have the right types of sparring? But then, there's also the thought that for some that he came over to Miami. It's not a good fight town. It's not a good fight, a good area to prepare in. It's a lot of nightlife. Maybe he was getting out and about a little bit too much. Filming this thing with Meek Mill, living in solid accommodations and whatnot. Maybe you need to come over here and go to the Rust Belt somewhere, or I don't know, upstate New York or something. But, maybe it's as simple as that. If you come over here, you just don't lose. There was thoughts that he made himself available. And I would agree. I think for him to sit up for a week or two, constantly talking about, even on the Breakfast Club, Sway in the Morning, ESPN, to sit around and talk about Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder so extensively, and just kind of disregarding Andy Ruiz a little bit, all of that might have all worked in concert to undo, whatever my man was going to do that night. But we'll see. Like I said, I believe that at the end of the day, that fight is probably taking place over here, and we'll see. We'll see what happens with it. Getting into that last situation. So, what I guess some of the inspiration to sit here and talk a little bit was, and nobody's really talking about this, but the Andrew Cancio fight with Machado was one of the first rematches that's already taken place. Cancio looked better than the first time around. Machado was even less effective than the first time around. Goes down to a body shot, and just immediately, from the end of the first round and into the second round, he started wavering. His confidence started wavering, and it got us to where we was going. Another phenomenal rematch performance was Juan Francisco Estrada back at the end of April, who was confident in coming back against a pound-for-pound guy, a number 8 pound-for-pound guy in Sor Rungvisai, and totally outclassed Sor Rungvisai. After dropping the first fight to him, which I don't know if I had that a draw or if maybe I had Estrada edging that one out. Maybe I had it a draw. I definitely was impressed with Estrada's performance. But anyway, building up to that fight, to come out on fight night and had a performance that he did and damn near, put in a virtuoso performance, like I said, against a pound-for-pound guy, and basically win 9 or 10 rounds easy, was just remarkable. And now we sit up and see where his future is going. Recently signed to Matchroom Boxing. I think he's popped up in the pound-for-pound discussion himself. And, he's a guy that's going places. So that's bouncing back from a rematch in a positive manner. And doing so immediately. I don't believe there was any opponents in the meantime, getting back to that fight. So those were two great examples. One of those being the winner, of the first fight, won the second. Speaking on Cancio. But then another interesting fight will be what goes on with what's his name, Angel Acosta, who lost to Elwin Soto a couple weeks back. had the fight in the bag. Had the fight in the bag, was up by 2 or 3 rounds, even though he'd been knocked down in the 3rd round, maybe. Even though he'd been knocked down, had a nice margin on the cards at the time of the stoppage in the 12th round, and gets caught with the beautifully timed left hook, I believe it was, from. I still haven't seen the punch. I mean, I watched the replay a dozen times, and I can see the punch, but I can't see it. It was so well placed and so well timed by Elwin Soto. And, he was briefly impaired, looking down at the floor a little bit, kind of, discombobulated and whatnot. And then I believe it was referee Thomas Taylor who steps in and calls that one off and takes, a fight from a championship guy. I mean, a champion. And takes away, any chance of that man retaining his titles, and just didn't have any faith in the man being able to regroup and sort things out and get himself together in that moment. Easy for us to sit here armchair quarterback that one, but when you are watching the guy, Thomas Taylor is in there just like Richard Steele between Meldrick Taylor and Chavez Sr. He's in here watching these punches and hearing these punches and seeing the force of these punches firsthand. I mean, them guys was throwing bombs on one another. All 12 rounds. Both guys being hurt or stunned at different times, and then the knockdown, like I mentioned earlier in the fight, maybe he wasn't quick on the draw, man. Maybe. Now, the one thing I guess, and I don't know if that's against the rules in California, without looking at it and thinking ahead of time, but could he have stepped in and given the mandatory 8, I think is what they call it? Or would that have been unfair to Soto in that moment? And like I said, the rules prohibit that from happening, so the only option he had to say, for Acosta's well-being was to go ahead and call the fight. The interesting thing is that was the first night, I believe, that the rematch, the replay, the instant replay, was being rolled out there for California, and for boxing is one of the first times. But, a judgment call like that is probably tantamount to what we see with pass interference. Previously, I think next year there'll be some you can't review holding. You can't review pass interference, at least prior to next season. And this was something that arguably, can't be reviewed. I mean, I don't know if you can stop the action in a fight and then, go back and review it for 2 to 5 minutes or more and determine that the fight shouldn't have been called, and then you go back and restart the fight. I don't know if that'll ever be the case. But, hell of a bad break for my man, Acosta. Lastly, getting ready to wrap this thing up. Who was the other one out there? Oh, I guess I didn't say much on Tony Harrison and Jermell Charlo on that rematch. I guess my concern there is now coming off of the fight with Jorge Cota a couple weeks ago. Getting the knockout. What was that, 2nd round knockout? 2 knockdowns. A deadly 2-piece that probably should have never been allowed by referee Jay Nady. The thing is now that Harrison will be coming off of an extended period of inactivity, coming off of this, rehab and his ankle and whatnot. Won't have time, probably just by the clauses from the first fight, won't be able to have a fight, won't be able to have a fight before facing Jermell, and has to go into that one pretty cold. So where does that leave him? How does that help or hurt his chances in the rematch? Coming in against a guy who's a little more sharper than you, who's very motivated, who's a former champion, And coming off of a devastating knockout, that kind of puts Harrison in some ways at a disadvantage. And who knows what the final location could be? Do they take it back to Vegas, which is more of a neutral site? Do they try to do something in Houston? What happens there? So those are some interesting things, I think, and basically that's part of the thinking on the situation with Jermell is expecting him to be more aggressive, more effective aggression and whatnot, and being a solid puncher. I don't know if he's a devastating puncher, especially when he has to adjust to the things that Tony Harrison is able to do in the ring, and his ring generalship and defense and his counter punching and how he can control it. So does it help or hurt Tony Harrison? So like I said, that's just running through a couple of scenarios with some of these rematches that are out there. I think I got any more notes that I wanted to get through. Like I said, to me, the most interesting one really could be this situation with Jarrett Hurd at the super welterweight level division. In my opinion, that could kind of be the most interesting one, simply for the fact now that going into this fight, this man has to try to. We're gonna know a lot based on who he chooses as his new trainer, to be honest. And it really doesn't seem like, I couldn't see him going with someone like a Ronnie Shields, who has a big history, or big recent history, or a significant recent history in that division. But other than that, what trainer out there do we really know of who's made a lot of noise and spent a lot of time, in the super welterweight division? So that's a very interesting decision that man has to make. And like I said, going up against a guy who completely has his number. It's just it doesn't look like it doesn't look positive for Swift. That's boxing, though. I said this before. This is boxing. Nobody really cares about your problems. You break your hand like we saw the other night with Jamal Charlo and Brandon Adams, which is a common thing. Guy break his hand in the first few rounds of a fight, you gotta finish the game. So you can believe that that Breadman Edwards and Julian Williams, they're not losing any sleep over this situation, and they're not gonna train any less. They're not gonna take it easy on fight night. The man is going in there and he'll be fighting for his livelihood. He'll be fighting for his reputation, along with trying to, get his belts back. So, like I said, that'll be the one that it doesn't have. It's not the same magnitude. Definitely, it's not the same magnitude as the heavyweight fights with Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury, or Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz. But it just doesn't seem like any of those individuals could be going into the fight as handicapped as it appears that Jarrett Hurd will be. That's that. And then on top of that, I guess the Harrison and Charlo situation, I guess we could say there's some concern there. But again, hell, for all we know, those two fights could happen on one card. That's the difference in the magnitude, really, between the heavyweight division and the money that's up there. Like I said, just basically the magnitude of those two fights. So that'll be very interesting. I'm gonna get ready to get on off of here, man. Like I said, I was just coming in here. It's a holiday. I'm getting ready to get some things going myself, and it's rough going back to work tomorrow, man. Rough going back to work tomorrow, and I didn't take that day off yesterday when I had the opportunity. Shot myself in the foot. I was gonna mention earlier, man, it don't even make much sense right now. Get out of this thing. Tripping. But anyway, like I said, man, I appreciate everybody checking out the channel. Got a couple comments this week and whatnot on the other videos that I put up there about the Jared Hurd situation, kind of giving you a little bit of behind the scenes information. I hate to see that happen for the man. And also, I don't know if you saw it, but an individual commented on the one and said that he was Jared Hurd's cut man. I don't have any way of verifying that. The brother told me he gonna see me at the next fight just for weighing in on the situation that everybody already saw. I don't know what you want to see me for at the next fight. You should be seeing Julian J. Rock Williams. But ironically, he was the individual that I heard the worst stuff about. Like I said, I didn't see the fight on TV because I was at the fight, so I didn't see what was going on in between the rounds. But from what I understand, he was a guy that just struggled to keep the Vaseline or to apply the Vaseline to Jared Hurd in between the corners. So like I said, I don't know how much stock I really put into my man's comment. I have no way of verifying who that individual was, but you know, it kind of is what it is. He actually validated what I said, because he said they had a terrible camp and and a terrible fight night. So that's basically all I was really covering. But it is what it is. Like I said, man, let me get ready to get on out of here. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. All right, man, enjoy the rest of your 4th of July.
I think it's funny, your bitch on my lap. Pussy get pushed, you know I'm a rat. That rollie get rugged and limited vibes. I'm rising above it. I know I'm